Welcome to my presentation on the vocabulary development of older readers. Learning to read is learning how to use the conventional forms of printed language to obtain meaning from words. This view implies that the child learning how to read needs to know how his or her writing system works. Reading vocabulary is made up of the words in print that we recognize or can figure out. These are the words that we must know in order to read increasingly more complex text with fluency and comprehension. Our early acquisition of words comes through oral language. These familiar words provide the foundation for later vocabulary growth, which is acquired primarily through what we read. Even Jane Austen knew that the best way to improve our minds was by extensive reading. At first, our language skills are developed through oral language, through speaking, talking, listening. We acquire new words and learn how to speak. As we get older, much of our learning of new words occurs through exposure to written text. Though written language is a far less effective vehicle for learning new words than oral language. When we speak to people and hear new words, we are given clues to what words mean by body language and intonation of voice and the situation. So we need more support to understand the words that we are learning through the things we read. There are two conditions for word learning to occur from reading. We must read widely to encounter new, unfamiliar words. To read those words, we must have the skills to be able to infer their meaning from the context in which we have read them. Older, better readers are more likely to confront novel, low-frequency words, which will promote the acquisition of new vocabulary. The volume of reading experience is the key mediating variable between reading skill, broadly conceived, and vocabulary. Does reading skill equal the amount of reading, or does the amount of reading equal a reader's skills? Good readers read quite a bit more than poor readers. A motivated middle school student might read 100 times more words a year in the classroom than a less skilled or motivated student. This is an example of the Matthew effect. The rich become richer and the poor become poorer. What can we do for our readers who are less skilled and less likely to do extensive reading? Successful vocabulary learners were found to be active strategy users who were conscious of their learning and took steps to regulate it, whereas poor learners displayed little awareness of how to learn new words or connect new words to prior knowledge. So, how do we best teach older readers to acquire new vocabulary in a way that helps them transfer that learning to new words that they encounter? We can do this by providing them with explicit instruction in a broad range of vocabulary learning strategies, which will help them to individualize their own learning experience. Older students need to feel that they are in charge of their learning. Strategies are important, and one strategy doesn't necessarily fit every learner or every situation. So it's important to provide students with a choice and give them the ability to understand which strategy might fit their particular situation. Explicit instruction is especially important for students who struggle. Just making students aware of the existence of strategies does not ensure that they will use these strategies. We can't just give them a list of strategies. Strategies need to be modeled. They need to understand which strategies are most helpful for which situations. Students need multiple strategies. This gives them a sense of autonomy where they can choose which strategy to use for which situation and gives them a sense of being in control of their learning. Collaborative feedback is important. We all learn best in an environment where we can talk and discuss and interact with other learners. It's also important to connect these learning strategies to their own experience. When they can connect the learning to their own learning experience, there's a greater chance that they will use the strategy and remember the strategy. There are many strategies, but I am not going to give you a list. I am particularly interested in morphophonemic analysis or structured word inquiry, looking at words and dissecting their meaning through their base and their affixes. Morphophonemic analysis is a strategy that has been found to boost word reading skills, particularly for older struggling readers. Teaching literacy in ways that increase readers' awareness of both morphemes and phonemes makes sense given the morphophonemic structure of English orthography. Research tells us that adult poor readers who were taught the morphophonemic structure through word analysis and multisyllabic word strategies made greater reading gains than more traditional instructional models adapted for adult use. Morphological awareness improves literacy at all levels of K through 12 schooling, especially for reading disabled students. So this isn't necessarily something just for older readers, but this is something that can be incorporated from the very beginning of students' instruction in learning how to read. Adolescent struggling readers who learn to parse complex words into syllables transfer their learning to recognize untaught words where those who were just taught to read whole words did not demonstrate learning transfer. So this is very important. We don't need to feel like we need to teach every single root, prefix, suffix, but we need to teach students to flexibly understand that words have bases, they have affixes, and those word parts have meanings that can transfer to other words. It's that whole idea of not giving someone a fish, but teaching them how to fish. So, how can we assist our students to access the morphological structure of words and find meaning? A very helpful strategy that has really informed my Orton Gillingham practice is structured word inquiry. This term was introduced by Peter Bowers and John Kirby in 2010. And it is a system of making sense of words by investigating them through their morphology, etymology, and phonology. We think of what they do as morphology, but that's not a good way to describe it. It would be insufficient to just call this work morphology. It's also informed by phonology and etymology. Peter Bauer states that this work does not minimize the role of phonology. Grapheme phoneme relationships are taught from the start. Often, etymology shows us how certain grapheme phoneme relationships will change over time. And we see how, as we add different suffixes, we will have phonetic shifts that occur, and that will impact the pronunciation. But we need to keep in mind that the meaning is primary and the spelling will stay consistent even though the pronunciation may shift. If we keep in mind that the primary function of English spelling is to represent meaning, that will help us as we encounter complex, multisyllabic words. The conventions by which English spelling represents meaning are so well ordered and reliable that spelling can be investigated and understood through scientific inquiry. These are the guiding principles of structured word inquiry. So, how do we incorporate this in our work with our students? In my Orton Gillingham work, I have incorporated prefixes, roots, and suffixes over the years, but I'm starting to do it more and more, particularly with my older students. With my students, I will gradually add these different new morphological elements to our card deck, and gradually our phoneme-based card deck will be replaced by base words and prefixes and suffixes until there gets to be the point where it's pretty much just these morphological elements. I use the card deck with The students, instead of just reading what it says, they spell out the roots, and often with the prefixes, they will either spell those out or say maybe two different options for pronunciation. Meaning is always paramount. So in this way, the students are actively engaged with the meaning of these words and how these different prefixes and suffixes will impact the meaning of the root word. Sometimes different words are explored that share the same base word or root. Through this exploration, we might be able to figure out what the meaning of that base is. We also take a look at the different prefixes and suffixes and make up our own matrix, and then take those components of the matrix and put it into word sums. In the context of the syllable division segment of our lesson, we circle the word parts and identify affixes and base words. The 4 questions are asked and the parts are put into word sums. The 4 questions are: number 1, what is the sense and meaning of your word? 2, how is it built? Can you identify any bases or affixes with a word sum? 3, what related words can you find? Are there morphological relatives that share a base? Are there etymological relatives who share a history? 4, what graphemes function coherently here? You should check that they represent the phonemes across the morphological family. You can check the influence of word origin on grapheme choice. Ask the question, is what you thought was a grapheme actually an orthographic marker? Then we build word sums. The steps for building word sums are: first, you start from the left side of the word sum, writing different prefixes or parts, base word, suffixes. As you look at the parts, you say, check the joins. That's where the plus signs are. And you mark changes on the left side of the word sum. You complete the right side of the word sum by announcing the structure you have represented on the left side of the sum. It's important to check the joins because that's often where you will use the different spelling conventions of dropping the non-syllabic E when you add a vowel suffix, or doubling a consonant before you add a vowel suffix, or changing a Y to I before you add a vowel suffix. Sometimes we just get on a roll and make new words by changing one part of the word at a time while retaining the root. Making up new words is fun. The culmination of all our word explorations is building a word matrix. As we look at words that share the base or root, sometimes you encounter a word that just doesn't fit. And this is a great opportunity to play word detective and go to Etymonline and see if this word's root indeed fits the meaning that you believe it should have. And sometimes you'll find that there are words that just don't fit. And that's an interesting discovery to make with your students. By understanding etymology, we can understand the history of a word over time. Etymology clarifies the identity of morphemes and can often account for patterns that phonology cannot. It's been especially eye-opening for me to examine more closely what would traditionally be considered irregular words or red words and look at them with new eyes, in the eye of the etymologist, who sees that the spelling has been preserved to retain the meaning of the word, but the pronunciation has often changed. So that's the explanation for a lot of the irregular spellings that we see. We can teach these words differently through the historical record of this word, and we don't necessarily need to teach all these different variations of phonology. Structured word inquiry has really given me an insight that I didn't have before, that sometimes I still believe that phonology is the primary way that we express a word, but I can also see that with more complex words, that morphology and etymology are often more informative as to understanding what that word says and what that word means. Structured word inquiry really sends you on a journey through language and how words are developed over time. Understanding this gives our students the ability to understand words in a new way. And this vocabulary knowledge empowers our students on their learning journey. As Emily Dickinson said, there is no frigate like a book to take us to lands away. Do you know what a frigate is? It is a light boat propelled originally by oars, but later by sails. Or it could be called a square-rigged war vessel intermediate between a corvette and a ship of the line. Or it could be a modern warship that is smaller than a destroyer. See how words change over time? The origin of frigate is Middle French from the Old Italian fregata. Its first known use was in 1583. Aren't words interesting? Thank you for listening.